In 17 years professionally doing this, I've never ever ranked a rookie wide receiver at the 1.1. It's always been a running back every single year of my 17 years. And this year, my 1.1 and 1.2 are wide receivers, DeVonta Smith and Jamar Chase.
I think Chase might be the more prototype, guy because of the size, because of the build. I mean, Smith is going to get that all offseason. That's going to be a talking point.
I still have Mahomes one. I don't know if you do as well, but yeah. Allen to me is like right there. These guys are in their own tier, and anybody else trying to get into that tier's hanging on. They're not in it. They're hanging on like Kyler, Herbert.
This is the Fantasy Football Show with your host, Smitty.
Top 5 running back. You're watching the Fantasy Football Show.
Smitty.
Take a lap. There are a lot of players, Matt, that emerged in 2021. There are a lot of players that busted, disappointed. Something around like half of all the top 40 were either disappointed, hurt, completely, fell flat on their face. But there were a lot of good emergences like Josh Allen, who was not like a surprise, but he definitely overperformed and outplayed his draft position. Justin Herbert was a big surprise for a lot of people. What do you make of those two, and who do you have ranked higher in like Dynasty?
I think right now it's Josh Allen. I love both of these two quarterbacks. I don't think there was a player who really captured my imagination and like my attention, was able to hold it throughout the entire season, quite like Justin Herbert, because he was so much better than we expected. This was a guy, I really bought into the Chargers offense a lot. Like I drafted a ton of Keenan Allen. I drafted a ton of Austin Ekeler. Obviously with injuries, that didn't really work out as much. And I sprinkled Mike Williams onto a lot of like late round selections in best ball leagues, especially. But it was sort of like one of those things, especially with Keenan Allen, where I was right for the wrong reasons, which is another kind of frustrating thing. Like you're talking about, sometimes you can be right on a player, but it's for the wrong reasons. Like I thought Tyrod Taylor would actually play above expectations. I thought people were being a little unfair with their criticisms of him, and especially with him able to develop that connection with Keenan Allen. I thought this Chargers offense was going to be good because I thought Tyrod Taylor would play better football than people gave him credit for. However, obviously what happens with the medical staff, they puncture his lung, he's removed from the equation, and Herbert was just so good that he really elevated that entire offense. So it was one of those, like I said, situations where I was right on the players, but for the wrong reasons, because the reason I was right on him ended up being Justin Herbert. He's that good. He's that type of difference maker. But Allen, on the other hand, man, this was another guy that I was all in on this year. I drafted him a ton. I'm a big Stefon Diggs guy. I have always believed for the last 3 to 4 years that he's an elite receiver. I mentioned reception perception up at the top, the methodology that I use to sort of quantify the qualitative reality of who's the best route runner in the NFL. To me, Diggs has always been that guy. I've been saying that, beating that drum for the last 3 years. And I think the connection that he had with Allen was instantaneous. It was incredible. And I think Allen, he's just getting better and better. Remember at the beginning of the year in September, we were saying, well, let's see what he does, when he faces a team that's not the Miami Dolphins. And honestly, it's funny now saying that. First couple seasons, we thought the model, a joke, but they ended up being a fringe playoff team, one of the better defenses in the league. Let's see what he does against some teams that aren't the bottom dwellers of the AFCs. Well, now we're seeing him do it against the Colts in the playoffs, like absolutely making those incredible special plays. I think this is just the beginning for Allen, and I think he has that ability to compete because of the rushing especially. And we're at a time in fantasy football where, like, if you don't run, you really can't. Honestly, you're like not even in contention to be an every week QB1 unless you're like a Tom Brady. You have this embarrassment of riches, and even he wasn't a consistent guy all year. Like Josh Allen's ability to run, I think, is going to make him a player that pushes for that QB1 spot every single season that he's in the NFL now.
Yeah, and he is only going to get better. Like, and the thing about Diggs, to your point there, Diggs is a guy that was tagged as an inconsistent, wide receiver, but he never had consistent quarterback play. So now that he has consistent quarterback play, Diggs is going to continue to be consistent, and he's going to be the definition of consistency. It's much like Tyreek Hill. He's so consistent, or Travis Kelce because of that quarterback. And so it puts him in top 12 overall consideration in 2021 for you?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Diggs, you're right. He was super consistent this year, and that wasn't part of his game before. He was consistently clearing 90 yards, and obviously some of his bigger touchdown games came at the end of the season, but you knew based on the volume and the yardage that he was accruing, you could bank on that touchdown positive regression coming at some point. It did come there towards the end of the year, especially in several like playoff moments he manages. We always love to remember that. But yeah, I'm very, like I said, because I spend so much time with the wide receiver position, I'm very radical sort of in my beliefs about how you can evaluate wide receivers, and you really just can't throw consistent or inconsistent on a guy because of exactly what you're saying. Yeah. It's quarterback play, it's offense. I mean, Diggs even said I wanted out of Minnesota because they were just hammering the fact that they wanted to establish the run. You know that his volume is going to be inconsistent because of the situation that he's in. Then he gets to Buffalo, a place that, and this was something I didn't even really think was going to happen. I thought the Bills would still be pretty run heavy. Like I said, I was in on Josh Allen this year, in on Stefon Diggs, but not to the point that I thought they'd both be like top 5 options at the position. I still thought the Bills would be rather run heavy, but we saw in 2020, they basically just forgot about, forget trying to establish a run, forget any of that. They're a pass-first team, and I think even if Brian Daboll takes a head coaching job sometime in the next month or so, I think they're going to probably remain that type of attack because they were that good at it.
Yeah, and Josh Allen came out of 2019 as a more running-type quarterback. Everyone thought, oh, my God, you're going to get these kind of rushing stats out of him, and he just took an entire – it's like Michael Jordan coming back from retirement. It was just a different game entirely. And I loved Josh Allen actually in 2018. Talk about being wrong when you're right. A lot of times on my bold predictions, which I have a famous bold prediction board that I put up every year, and there's 10 to 12 bold predictions. And one of them in 2018 was that Josh Allen by the start of 2019 would be a top 4 quarterback in fantasy football. So I was really, really high on him. And while he did turn into, roughly that last year, he didn't quite make it that high. His running did help him get kind of near those levels at times. He had a cup of coffee with that range, but he definitely turned into that quarterback this year. So I'm totally all in on Josh Allen and have been too. And he's my number 2 ranked quarterback. And I think anybody having him number 1, I don't have a problem with that at all. I'm not mad at anybody that has Allen 1, especially in Dynasty. I still have Mahomes 1. I don't know if you do as well, but Allen to me is right there. These guys are in their own tier, and anybody else trying to get into that tier's hanging on. They're not in it. They're hanging on, like Kyler, Herbert. They're all kind of in the mix for that next tier, though.
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny you mentioned that Josh Allen 2018 season, because I was making that same the argument this year that we weren't giving enough credence to the fact that Josh Allen as a rookie in 2018, let's not forget, his top targets were Kelvin Benjamin, Zay Jones, and running back LaShawn McCoy. To go from that, and this is why it's always important to remember the context with the player. You could talk about his completion percentage or whatever, and yeah, certainly he improved as a player going into year 3. There's no question about it, but he went from that was his supporting cast to Stefon Diggs, John Brown, Cole Beasley, and these guys have all elevated each other, and you just love to see it.
I just released a video on YouTube talking about how in 17 years professionally doing this, I've never, ever ranked a rookie wide receiver at the 1.1. It's always been a running back every single year of my 17 years. And this year, my 1.1 and 1.2 are wide receivers, DeVonta Smith and Jamar Chase. And it's not speaking necessarily to a change in my thinking, because I've always been, in my 17 years, a best player available drafter, and I coach people on that. You don't draft on a situation that you've planned out or a concrete plan of attack heading into your draft. You have to adjust and adapt to the flow of your draft. So I've never changed that. But that goes to show how much I believe in these 2 wide receivers. And the landing spots could be very, very good for both of them. One could land in Miami, and I know some may argue Tua is going to be good. I personally don't believe in Tua. I think Tua is going to end up busting out of the league. But I think Philadelphia is an option for DeVonta Smith. A lot of people will argue they need other positions. I get that. But there are other ways to accumulate offensive linemen. You don't have to take them in the top 10 every single time to fill that need. And Jamar Chase, I predict, gets paired back up with Joe Burrow in Cincinnati. So we have a Chase in Cincy, DeVonta Smith potentially in Philly. What are your thoughts on these two guys, and do you see them as potential top 5 eventual wide receivers in fantasy football?
Yeah, the wide receiver position in the NFL right now, and I feel lucky that I'm kind of trying to be at the forefront to study and evaluate this position. It's just so stacked, right? Because we can talk about this class of Chase and Smith, and I think both of those guys are great players. I think Chase might be the more prototype, guy because of the size, because of the build. I mean, Smith is going to get that all offseason. That's going to be a talking point, that there's never been a player drafted at his height and his weight combination, like a 170 or whatever, and he's over 6 foot. Like, we haven't seen a lot of guys like that. Well, this guy gets open at all levels of the field. Confident winner. Like, I would be surprised if Smith doesn't find success in the league. I really like this player. I like Chase a lot too. Both those guys are going to be really good players. So I'm in on them for sure. Right now, and again, we'll see what happens based on the rest of the offseason. More study goes into it. I think I like Chase just a little bit better, but that's no shot to Smith either. Both of those guys are really good players, like I mentioned. But wide receiver right now is stacked, right? Because we're talking about this class with Smith and Chase, and there's a lot of depth beyond those guys. This is a really good receiver class, too. 2020 was an excellent receiver class. Justin Jefferson was a huge hit. CeeDee Lamb looks great. All these guys that were just drafted last year look incredible. Like, almost everybody except Jalen Reagor basically showed some positive results in their first season. 2019, awesome receiver class. Like, some of the best receivers of the next few years. DK Metcalf, A.J. Brown, Terry McLaurin, Marquise Brown is starting to pop back up. Deebo Samuel's still out there. Basically everyone except N'Keal Harry, who was the Patriots drafted in the first round. Like, that was a great receiver class. 2018 produced a bunch of studs that we're still talking about, whether it's DJ Moore, Cortland Sutton, some of those players. We've been absolutely spoiled by wide receiver classes.
Let me interrupt you here and ask you this then, because this is the age-old question. What does that mean for a fantasy drafter? And I know my answer, but is a fantasy drafter in a better position to then wait on wide receiver because it's so stacked, or take a couple of these big dogs at with the first 2 picks of the draft and then land those running backs later that are naturally going to be shoved down more than normal because the wide receivers are so good? It's a tough decision to make, and I think there's honestly no wrong decision. You can win 100 different ways, but what is your natural inclination, to wait on wide receiver because it's stacked, or go heavy?
Man, this past year, and I feel like my instincts right now are saying to do the same thing this coming year. And again, let me say, like, I'm a wide receiver guy, man. It is tough to pass up the DeAndre Hopkins types, the Julio Joneses early in the draft last year, but mostly did that and took my first wide receiver maybe in the 3rd round, like an Allen Robinson type, and then grabbed like Tyler Lockett or DK Metcalf and Terry McLaurin. Like, I think a lot of that is going to be the way to go this year too, where like take a couple of 1 and 2, take your running backs, because you know the deal, man, and everyone knows this. Like, running back is more volatile, right? Like, these guys can easily get hurt. They miss a ton of time. Like, if you drafted Christian McCaffrey or Saquon Barkley, you hate your life last year, right? Like, that was a mess. However, if you hit on those guys, Alvin Kamara, you hit on Derrick Henry, you hit on Dalvin Cook, there's nothing better than just being able to set and forget that position. So my instinct right now is probably to, again, take your shots on running backs in round 1, round 2, and then just start picking off these different breakout receivers, because there's just too many of them. There's not too many of them that like players won't be able to find their way in. Like, productive guys will always find their way on the field. They'll always end up getting targets if they're in that right situation. But yeah, I think the move is probably to take running backs early and then start picking off some of your favorite receiver values in rounds 4 to 7.
Yeah, but the crazy part is, I don't know how much mock drafting you've done for 2020, but we've already done like probably 20 mock drafts on my live streams, maybe more. But the interesting thing that I'm noticing is that these wide receivers being so stacked are shoving players like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, probably the rookies, Antonio Gibson, Miles Sanders, Austin Ekeler, Swift, Montgomery, all these guys into like the 3rd round consideration, 3rd and 4th round. So you end up getting yourself 2 elite stud wide receivers, especially if you're drafting from like the 12-13 bookend slot. If you were to go wide receiver there, or if you're drafting in the middle of the draft and you get like Adams, and then in the middle of the second round you take Ridley or DK, because he does tend to fall there for some reason right now, or Mike Thomas at like 15 overall, depending on how he finishes, will determine whether that changes or not. But this is what you're dealing with wide receiver wise in the first and second round. And then you end up getting a Montgomery, who's like 4th scoring running back in 2020 in the third round. So like knowing that information, knowing that you could get Montgomery in round 3 and let's say Clyde Edwards-Helaire in round 4, does that change your opinion at all?
Yeah, definitely, because there's a temptation to try to get that number 1 receiver. For me last year, I've been putting DeVonta Adams as my number 1 wide receiver in fantasy for 2 years. So don't give me credit for getting it right in 2019, because I was way wrong. Or I right in 2020. I was way wrong on it in 2019. It is what it is. Mike Thomas was obviously that guy. So it's all about the feel of the draft room to me. Like it's like you said, don't go into any draft being like, I have to take a wide receiver here or I have to take a running back here. If you're early in your draft and you see a guy like DeVonta Adams was last year, who's not going to go as the number 1 receiver, but has the potential, the path to be that guy, I absolutely support taking that and then trying to pluck off some of these running backs that are going to be discounted because they're coming off disappointing years, even if they're still in great situations. I mean, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I love that you're bringing him up because he was a player I was willing to rank aggressively last year. Obviously, things go wrong when Le'Veon Bell gets in the mix, and then he eventually gets hurt. But he was playing pretty well, just wasn't scoring a ton of touchdowns, but was playing pretty well. His last game before Bell got in the mix against the Bills, he was super productive with rush game. I would be surprised if he has a much better second season than he did as a rookie.
Yeah, I like Clyde a lot. I was super bullish on him. We all were. Everybody got excited about it, and for good reason. It wasn't like it was a mistake, I think, where we rectify how we rank rookies. Like, I'm like Brett Favre, man. I tell people I'll go out and throw 4 INTs. I'll get right back out there. I'm not afraid to be bullish on a player that I really, truly believe is going to be an elite player just because I missed on a rookie or something like that. I think Clyde could bounce back in a major way in 2021. And the Chiefs, how they use him in the playoffs here is going to determine a lot, just like with Mike Thomas, how he gets used and how he does will determine a lot. People have very short memories, and sometimes that's unfortunate because you as an analyst, you see a guy like Mike Thomas getting undervalued to an extreme degree, and you're like, oh my God, this content's amazing for my followers. Mike Thomas at 12, 13 bookend picks, do it all day long, and then he's going to finish well, and then everyone's going to have him back at 8 or 7. Same thing with Clyde. Clyde's a 4th rounder right now, maybe 5th rounder to some people. But if the Chiefs do what they usually do, which is make, like Damian Williams strong down the finish in 2018, give him the best Super Bowl performance he could have in 2020 or 2019, and then now with Clyde in 2020, maybe they run him like crazy and they vault his value up.
Yeah, he's like he'll be back to like a 2nd round pick. He has a couple great like playoff games or something like that. Yeah, that totally makes sense. It happens.
Let me give you a couple names. Give me as rapid fire answer as you can on these individual questions here. Jonathan Taylor, is he going to continue his success into 2021 at the level he is or higher?
I think he'll be sort of around the level that we saw in the second half of the season. Some of the efficiency might come down, but I think once the game slowed down for him, even if he made some mistakes in the playoff loss against the Bills, whatever. Obviously, some soft defenses padded his stats, but I believe in the player and I believe in the situation. Like, he should still remain one of the focal points of that offense.
Is Swift going to be a high-end running back too, like most people think he could be, or even a low-end running back one, or do you think he busts? Because, in my opinion, I trust Detroit developing a running back as much as I trusted Peterson and that Eagles staff to give the ball to Sanders all year. Sanders was one of the biggest avoids of all 2020 for me. And Swift was also an avoid for me. I'm not sure how I feel about him this year, but I'm curious to know if you think he can step up and really kind of change the pattern here of Detroit not being able to create a running back since Barry Sanders.
Yeah, I like Swift the player a lot, and I think some of the flashes that we saw of him were great. I do hesitate a little bit just because we don't know if he's going to be there yet. I think Once we get an answer on that, we might have some more clarity. The only thing that really does make me think that Swift could be up there around that range is I really do believe in his pass catching ability. I think there was an affinity with Darrell Bevel and Adrian Peterson. I think the fact that Swift got so banged up in training camp, there was just a slow nature to bring him along. We just also, I feel like we're talking about a lot of rookie running backs, so it's always important to remember, like, we typically think running back is just an easy position to drop these guys in and like they just run off. But the fact that we had the pandemic adjusted offseason this year and everything was slower burn, like Taylor, Cam Akers, Swift, all these guys like were slow starters but hot finishers. I think that could be a pretty big factor even in a guy like Swift who didn't finish the same way as Akers and Taylor but could be that guy maybe next year. I'm basically like not leaning too strong one way or the other right now on this guy.
He's definitely a guy I'm not too sure on. I'm indifferent on. I don't hate Swift. I'm not calling him a bust, but I certainly find it hard drafting him as high as some people are willing to at this point. And I always get I'm sure you see this too. It's so common in our industry, but like you'll do like a top 5 running back ranking or something that people will go, "Where's Swift?" Like very, very, very shocked question. Like, or like if I do my top 5 wide receivers, I'll get a "Where's Julio?" Like, like I'm some moron because Julio's been left off of a very deep wide receiver pool where Julio has a huge amount of questions.
Didn't just forget he exists either. I always love when people do that. Well, where's this guy? Well, he's not on the list. He's maybe 6, 7, 8, 9, one of the other numbers after 5. But I do remember that this guy exists.
So James Robinson, is he for real? And do you anticipate him having like a drop in production in 2021, or does the Trevor Lawrence drafting make him way more secure?
I think that makes him more secure. And I was impressed with Robinson because this was a guy I was all like ready and willing to say, as soon as they turn away from Gardner Minshew and they go to like Glennon or whatever, Jake Luton, like this is a player we're not going to be considering in fantasy anymore. Until he got hurt, he was really good. Even in the Glennon games, even in the Jake Luton games, Robinson was still a pretty useful back. And the thing I think that was most impressive about him is not just that he came from the ranks of the undrafted and was immediately their starting running back. At different points of the season, he was like the only Jacksonville Jaguars running back to get touches. I mean, and obviously it's not like a stacked depth chart there or anything, but you rarely see running backs ever handle 90% of the team's rushes or almost all of the targets. But Robinson was that guy, and so for me, I think he kind of maintains that sort of value. He might not be a top 5 back, but he's certainly someone that I think will hang on in the fringes of the RB1 discussion.
And Ekeler, same question. Do you believe he's going to bounce back in 2021, or do you think is his 2020 season more of like what we might find coming out of 2021? Like, will he be a tough guy to bank on for 16 games because of his build and how likely he is to get hurt if they lean on him at a full-time capacity? What are your thoughts on Ekeler?
Man, I love Austin Ekeler. I know Austin pretty well. I've gotten a chance to work out with him a ton. This guy's a beast, man. I know like he's listed at this, that, or the other, but even if he got hurt last year, so maybe I'm willing to die on bad take hill, or I've got take lock on this one. Yeah, we're not talking about a guy in Austin Ekeler. We're just gonna be slamming into the line of scrimmage between the tackles, whatever. But I think he's really equipped to boost a ton of work in the passing game. I think Herbert's emergence is really crucial for him too. So I'm still very bullish on Austin Ekeler. This is a guy I was all in on last year. Didn't really work out because of the injury, but when he played, he was very productive, a very safe floor type of back. I still think that ceiling is accessible for him as well.
Let's finish it off with a very, very fast rapid fire. You tell me which player, you don't have to give me an explanation, you tell me which player you like more heading into 2021. Yes. Ridley or Diggs?
Diggs.
Josh Allen or Kyler Murray?
Oh, definitely Josh Allen.
Barkley or Elliott?
Probably Saquon. Just a little worried about Zeke, just a tad.
Owning 5 picks in the second round, but having no draft selections until round 10. What approach would you rather have? A normal draft selection type of draft, or those 5 picks in round 2 and no picks until round 10?
I love this question because as when I'm doing like salary cap auction drafts or whatever, I'm a very studs and duds, like stars and scrubs type of guy. So give me all the second round picks. I'll figure the rest out on the waiver wire in season.
That's how I am. I asked Matthew Berry, Scott Hansen from the Red Zone, and one of the fantasy footballers that same question but different. And maybe I'll ask you that question real quick. Would you rather have the 1.1 and 1.2 overall, so you could get the top 2 running backs, or in a no picks until round 7, or would you rather have a normal draft from like, let's say, the 7 pick?
Yeah, you got to be a little humble in this industry. I feel like you got to admit when you're wrong. You got to know that you don't always get everything right. We talked about this earlier. So give me the 2 early picks. I'll take backs because I know that a lot of my picks between rounds 3 to 7 are probably gonna bust anyways, and I'll be looking for waiver wire replacements, whether it's injuries or I misevaluated the situation. We always overrate the draft, man, because it's the most fun thing in fantasy. Like, nothing's better than drafting, but most of it is in-season management, being aggressive on the waiver wire and everything like that. So give me the 2 early picks, and I'll figure the rest out.
And by the way, McCaffrey and Barkley would have busted on you in 2020.
Yeah, would have been a terrible team.
Matt, I thank you for coming on, man.
Yeah, appreciate your time. Keep killing, and you're doing great stuff, and hope we could talk again soon.
Yeah, I appreciate you, Matt. Take a lap. You guys know Matt Harmon from Yahoo Sports.
It's been over 5 years now that I've been doing this, professionally, full-time. This is my job. I got started as basically just like a lot of folks did right now, just another goofball with a website. I love football. I love playing fantasy, and I loved to write. So the year after I graduated college, actually, while I was applying to some master's and then PhD programs for studying social theory, I decided, look, this is something I love to do from just a perspective. Things happened in my person, completely flipped the script and went after this full time and freelanced around a little bit. But the thing that really got me going was the methodology that I created to evaluate wide receivers. It's called reception perception. It's another thing I do in addition. I still do today in addition to working with Yahoo Sports. So that's basically kind of the short version of how I got started, how I got here. And now, with Yahoo, it's doing everything, man, podcasts, videos, fantasy football live every Sunday morning. And now that we're kind of in the off season, it's nice to be able to take sort of that 30,000 foot view to be able to see exactly what happened last year and what might happen in future years. I love this time of year. Honestly, I don't know if you feel the same way, but getting out of the in-season structure, the very rubric way that in-season fantasy content works, it's almost kind of refreshing to be able to unspool the mind a little bit and think about the game from a bigger perspective.
Yeah, I'm always pretty honest with my followers and tell them that, I honestly dread the end season. I don't like it anywhere near as much as the off season. And because of the structure you're talking about, it's like you have to do these mundane 50-50 call questions, answering these over and over. Do you start, and sometimes they're like big name players, but do you start McLaurin or do you start, Chris Godwin? It's like, you're going to get that right even as a so-called expert, maybe just over 55, 60% of the time. And it's like that kind of stuff you deal with on a daily basis. It's all timed. And then as soon as January 1 kicks off, I'm here in my studio hacking away at my rookie rankings and analysis, and I flip the switch over to the 2021 season, and it's the best day of the year for me to just get right into the next year's content. So I'm totally with you on that.
This is the Fantasy Football Show with your host, Smitty.
Top 5 running back. You're watching the Fantasy Football Show.
Smitty.